Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Recognizing toxic and manipulative relationships early on is crucial. Ending them swiftly and safely can mean the difference between healing and irreversible harm. But even when someone makes the brave decision to walk away, doing so with caution and tact is essential because the reaction of a controlling person can be dangerously unpredictable. It's a common misconception that only insecure or emotionally fragile individuals fall victim to such manipulation. In reality, anyone can be targeted. Those who seem vulnerable are often only seen that way after enduring significant emotional trauma. And no one is truly immune to the outbursts or obsessive behavior that may follow when a manipulative person feels they're losing control. The story of a young Italian college student named Giulia Cecchettin shook the entire country in the fall of 2023 due to its heartbreaking cruelty and senselessness. Giulia was known as a kind-hearted and trusting person. She showed compassion toward a young man who had deep feelings for her. She feared that rejecting him might lead him to harm himself. But tragically, that wasn't what happened. Instead of turning inward, the individual redirected his pain outward, with devastating consequences. The full extent of what occurred was later pieced together through Giulia's personal journals, which revealed her growing discomfort and emotional turmoil. Meanwhile, the person responsible attempted to avoid accountability, claiming it was a result of overwhelming emotions and temporary confusion. But the evidence uncovered during the investigation consistently pointed to premeditation. Giulia Cecchettin was born on May 5, 2001, in the small Italian town of Vigonovo, in the municipality of Padua. She was the middle child of Monica Camerotto and Gino Cecchettin, raised alongside her older sister, Elena, and younger brother, Davide. Though the sisters were polar opposites in temperament, Elena being rebellious and full of energy, while Giulia remained quiet, modest, and obedient, they were inseparable from a young age. The family belonged to the middle class. Gino worked as an engineer at a local company, while Monica held a position in the city administration. They lived in a spacious home and owned multiple vehicles. Both parents were deeply devoted to their children and worked hard to ensure they had everything they needed to grow up to be kind, responsible individuals. From early childhood, Giulia stood out for her kindness and empathy. She was naturally drawn to people, always making an effort to be helpful and considerate. Sometimes she was too gentle. She'd go out of her way to avoid conflict, even at the expense of her own interests. Giulia had a large social circle and was quick to make friends, easily blending into any group. In school, she consistently earned top grades and had a passion for literature and foreign languages. But what truly lit her up were art classes. Her teachers recognized her natural talent and encouraged her to continue in that direction. As a teenager, she enrolled in an art academy while still in high school and seriously considered pursuing a career in the arts. However, as graduation approached and the question of her future became pressing, her parents urged her to choose a more practical and stable career path. Following her father's advice, she enrolled at the University of Padua, one of Italy's most respected public institutions, choosing the field of medical engineering. Giulia, never one to cause conflict, agreed without argument and threw herself into her studies, even though her heart was never in it. She had no desire to work in that field long term. During her time at university, Giulia met a classmate named Filippo Turetta. He was born the same year as her, just a few months later, and grew up in the nearby town of Torreglia, also located in Padua. Filippo came from a modest background and was the only son of Elisabetta and Nicola Turetta, who cherished him deeply. The two were studying in the same department, and a mutual attraction developed quickly. Their bond started with long conversations, emotional support, and shared challenges. When Filippo began to struggle academically, Giulia helped him catch up and pass his exams. Not long afterward, he asked her out on their first date. Their relationship officially began in January 2022, marking Giulia's first serious romance. Coming from a sheltered background, she fell head over heels. For the first 6 months, the couple was practically inseparable. They went everywhere together and seemed genuinely happy, so much so that their families and friends had no reason to doubt the depth of their connection. Just 2 months into the relationship, Filippo invited Giulia to his home for dinner and introduced her to his parents, referring to her as his future wife. A few weeks later, she did the same, bringing him home to meet her own family. Friends of the couple were convinced that by graduation, Giulia and Filippo would be engaged. But life took a devastating turn for Giulia's family. Her mother, Monica, was diagnosed with a late-stage illness. The prognosis was bleak. Her health declined rapidly, and despite consultations, doctors admitted there was little they could do. The following 6 months were like a waking nightmare for the Cecchettin family. During this difficult time, Filippo did his best to be supportive. He stayed close to Giulia and spent time with Monica as well. Giulia deeply appreciated his presence. She truly cared for him and was grateful for his kindness and steady support. Despite agreeing to take part in experimental treatments, Monica passed away in October 2022. She was only 51 years old. Her passing left a massive void. For her husband, Gino, the grief was almost unbearable. He became emotionally overwhelmed, and it was only through the love and presence of his son and daughters that he found the strength to go on. While Filippo remained present and helpful, something between the couple had begun to change. Though they were still together, Giulia had started to feel distant and uncertain about their future. She was already considering ending the relationship, but didn't know how to bring it up without causing conflict or upsetting him. She confided only in her 2 closest friends, people she'd known for years and trusted completely. They were shocked. From the outside, Giulia and Filippo looked like the perfect couple. Their relationship appeared happy, harmonious, and solid. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Giulia didn't go into specific details, but she made it clear that the relationship had reached a breaking point. Ending it was just a matter of time. She didn't want to hurt Filippo, but she couldn't continue living a lie. The true reason behind her decision would only become clear much later, after her passing. At the time, Giulia was diligently preparing for her final thesis presentation. But deep down, she knew she had no intention of building a career in medical engineering. Her heart wasn't in it. Quietly, without telling many people, she submitted an application to a prestigious international art school in Reggio Emilia, focused on comic illustration. When she finally opened up to her father about it, she made one thing clear: she would complete her university degree as promised. She planned to graduate and earn her credentials as expected by her parents. But after that, she would pursue a second degree, this time in something she truly loved. She wanted to become an illustrator. Gino listened carefully and didn't object. After losing his wife, he had gained a new perspective on life. He understood how short and fragile it could be. He told his daughter she was free to follow her own path, to make her own decisions, and to dedicate herself to what genuinely brought her joy. The conversation Giulia had with Filippo turned out to be far more difficult than she had anticipated. It happened in August 2023, after the couple had been together for over a year and a half. Giulia struggled to find the right words, but Filippo appeared to take the news with maturity. He even suggested that they stay friends and keep in touch, acknowledging the bond they had shared. Since they were still attending the same university and studying in the same department, their paths crossed regularly. However, it took less than a week after the breakup for Filippo to try to rekindle their relationship. He invited Giulia to one of their favorite restaurants, the kind of place that had once felt special to them, and pleaded with her to give things another chance, reminding her of the good times they had. But Giulia stood firm. She didn't want to repeat past mistakes. That evening ended without incident, but there was an unspoken tension in the air that only grew stronger with time. What followed was a concerning shift. Filippo began calling and messaging Giulia every single day. At first, his tone was emotional, professing love and begging for reconciliation, but that quickly escalated into manipulation and threats. He claimed that if they didn't get back together, he might hurt himself. Filippo, already familiar with Giulia's compassionate nature, used that knowledge against her. He pushed her emotional buttons, targeting her empathy and guilt. Julia, knowing how emotionally unstable he could be, gave in. She worried that he might act on his threats, and in an effort to keep things calm, she agreed to maintain contact. For a brief period, they resumed seeing each other, though it was more out of concern than romance. Deep down, she hoped it was just temporary, that once things cooled down, the connection would fade for good. But Filippo's behavior became more alarming. He started sending her dozens of messages a day. The content became increasingly disturbing. In one message, he wrote that they would either be together forever or their lives would both come to an end. It was a chilling statement, clearly a threat. But Julia never reported it to anyone in authority. She only told her closest friend. This tense dynamic dragged on for nearly 2 months. Then, in late October 2023, Julia finally decided she couldn't keep living in fear. On November 16th, she was scheduled to present her thesis in medical engineering. Just weeks later, in December, her classes at the International School of Comics would begin. Her time was now fully occupied. She couldn't afford to continue navigating emotional drama or toxic attachment. Still nervous about Filippo's reaction, she invited him to meet her at a quiet cafe they used to frequent. She chose her words carefully, hoping to avoid confrontation. Julia explained gently that they could remain on friendly terms, but nothing more. She tried to be respectful and kind, but her decision deeply unsettled Filippo. He took the conversation hard. Filippo kept calling and messaging Julia, but she tried to avoid him, occasionally replying with short notes, explaining that she was busy finishing her thesis. That's when Filippo began secretly following her. It didn't take long for him to notice she had started spending time with someone new, a guy named Eric. Their connection appeared warm and friendly, and from the outside, it looked like the two were on the verge of becoming a couple. Filippo couldn't accept that. In his mind, a darker plan was already forming. On Saturday, November 11th, 2023, Julia spent most of her day working on her graduation project. Around 5 p.m., she emailed the final version to her academic advisor. Roughly an hour earlier, her ex-boyfriend had called, asking if she would go shopping with him to help pick out shoes for their upcoming graduation ceremony. It's worth noting that Filippo hadn't contacted her at all for about a week prior. No texts, no calls, and no surprise visits. Julia believed, perhaps naively, that he had finally accepted the breakup and moved on. Wanting to keep things cordial, she agreed to help him shop. They made plans for Filippo to pick her up around 6:30 p.m. Julia let her father know she'd be back before midnight. She hugged him tightly before leaving, the last time he would see her alive. Filippo pulled up to the Cequitin home right on time. Julia got into the passenger seat, and the two drove off toward the local shopping center. Witnesses later reported seeing them together, calmly browsing the stores. They purchased a pair of shoes, and around 9 p.m., they grabbed a quick bite to eat at the food court. At approximately 10:30 p.m., surveillance cameras in the parking lot captured them returning to the vehicle. Everything appeared normal. Both looked relaxed, casually chatting as they got into the car. On the way home, Julia was texting with her older sister about everyday things, but at 10:45 p.m., her messages abruptly stopped. She never replied again. Moments later, her phone was turned off. When Julia failed to return home after midnight, her family became increasingly anxious. At first, they tried not to panic, thinking maybe she had simply lost track of time. But by 1 a.m., they realized something was very wrong. Julia never stayed out overnight without informing someone. Her phone remained off and Filippo was unreachable. Her father and older sister went to file a missing person report. Meanwhile, her younger brother stayed home in case Julia returned. There was still a faint hope that her phone had died or she'd gotten delayed, but even then they believed she would have found some way to check in. Police, however, were skeptical. They explained that Julia, being an adult, had every right not to come home or report her whereabouts. Only a few hours had passed since she was last seen, and by protocol, search efforts for missing adults typically don't begin until 24 hours have elapsed. What no one knew at the time was that roughly 4 hours before the family went to the station, something alarming had already been reported, a detail no one initially linked to Julia's disappearance. But soon, it would become clear that this was no coincidence. Around 11 p.m. on the night Giulia went missing, local police received a call from a man named Marco Musme. He had stepped out onto his balcony for a cigarette when he witnessed something disturbing. His apartment overlooked a small parking lot across the street. From that lot, he heard frantic screaming, someone shouting for help. Looking closer, he saw a young woman burst from a parked car, visibly terrified. A man exited the same vehicle moments later, caught up to her, and physically forced her back inside, appearing to strike her in the process. He then shoved her into the back seat and quickly drove away. The car sped off into the night. Marco tried to memorize the license plate but couldn't make it out due to the darkness and distance. He only recalled that it was a black compact vehicle, possibly a Fiat Punto. He immediately called the local authorities to report what he had seen, but without further identifying details, there was little they could do. Authorities initially dismissed Marco Musme's call. With few details to go on, they didn't consider it an immediate threat and opted not to respond to the report. But Marco couldn't shake the feeling that what he had witnessed was far more serious. He decided to go to the police station in person, convinced that he had seen a crime in progress. At the station, he crossed paths with a man named Gino, Giulia's father, who was there to report his daughter missing. To their surprise, they realized they lived just a few houses apart. Marco's building sat near the end of the street, and directly across from it was the small parking lot where the disturbing scene had taken place. The car Marco described, a black compact vehicle, closely matched the one Filippo drove. That same evening, Filippo had picked up his former girlfriend in his black Fiat Grande Punto before they headed to the shopping center. Investigators contacted Filippo's parents, Elisabetta and Nicola Turetta, who were also worried. They had been calling friends, hoping someone had heard from their son. Unfortunately, they weren't able to provide any helpful leads to the police. Officers were immediately dispatched to the parking lot, now presumed to be the scene of a violent incident. But to their dismay, there were no security cameras in the area. With no footage, detectives had to rely solely on the witness's testimony and any physical evidence they could find. What they discovered was alarming. On the ground lay a large knife with a blade broken near the handle. Nearby were several dark reddish stains. While the amount of blood wasn't excessive, it was clear someone had been injured. Forensic experts confirmed that the fingerprints on the knife belonged to Filippo, and the blood traces matched Giulia's DNA. The broken blade and the deep gouge in the pavement suggested that the attacker had missed his target during the initial attempt, striking the asphalt instead. Investigators feared the worst, but still hoped Giulia might be alive and in need of urgent help. Both students' phones had been turned off shortly after the incident, and data showed that their last known location was that very parking lot, the site of the suspected assault and abduction. Given the evidence, law enforcement opened a criminal case on charges of assault and unlawful detainment. Filippo was now the primary suspect. His parents were in disbelief. They insisted that their son could never harm Giulia, that he loved her deeply. Detectives began tracing Filippo's movements by reviewing footage from roadside surveillance cameras, but it was a time-consuming process. No one yet knew where he might have gone. Later that night, the black Fiat Grande Punto was seen heading toward a lake in the province of Pordenone. The following day, the vehicle was spotted in several regions: Veneto, Friuli Venezia Giulia, and as far as South Tyrol. On November 12th, a young man matching Filippo's description made a purchase at a gas station near the Austrian border. He paid with a €20 bill that appeared to have dried bloodstains on it. The cashier didn't think much of it at the time, but surveillance footage later confirmed the buyer was Filippo. Another chilling piece of evidence emerged soon after. A surveillance camera in an industrial area on the outskirts of Fosso, near Giulia's hometown of Viganovo, captured harrowing footage. In the video, a man can be seen physically attacking a woman. After the assault, he stood over her motionless body for several minutes before lifting her up and placing her in the trunk of a car. At the scene, investigators found pools of blood and clear signs of a struggle. There was no longer any doubt that Giulia had likely lost her life. But where were her remains? And where had the suspect gone? Filippo was officially declared wanted across Europe. Then, on November 18th, a grim discovery was made. In a small ravine near Lake Barsis, search teams found a severely damaged body hidden beneath a large rock and partially covered by black plastic bags. Medical examiners documented multiple signs of extreme aggression. The victim had suffered dozens of stab wounds, blunt force trauma to the head, and visible signs of restraint around her wrists. Adhesive residue on her face suggested that her mouth had been taped shut. The nature of the incident indicated a personal motive and an extraordinary level of rage. Filippo was finally located on November 19th in Germany, nearly 600 miles away from the town of Viganovo. Authorities took him into custody and extradited him back to Italy, where the case had already sparked national outcry. During his first interrogation, Filippo confessed in detail to what had occurred. However, he claimed he was in a state of emotional disorientation at the time and couldn't remember parts of the sequence. According to his version, the two had spent a pleasant day together shopping at the mall. On the drive back, they stopped at a parking lot near Giulia's house. Filippo gave her a stuffed animal as a gift and asked if they could try to start over. Giulia allegedly raised her voice, rejected the gift, and stepped out of the car. That, he claimed, triggered a sudden wave of uncontrollable anger. He grabbed a knife and chased after her, injuring her shoulder. Giulia collapsed, and when he tried to strike again, he missed. His knife snapped upon hitting the pavement. Filippo said he forced her back into the car, tied her wrists with rope, covered her mouth with tape, and drove aimlessly with no specific destination in mind. Eventually, he pulled into an industrial zone. Giulia, according to his account, managed to open the door and escape. That's when he retrieved a second knife and chased her down, continuing the attack until she went still. When asked how many times he struck her, Filippo said maybe 5 or 7. However, the forensic team counted more than 70 wounds, and his claim of an unplanned outburst was inconsistent with the fact that he had come to the meeting prepared, with not 1 but 2 knives, rope, tape, and plastic bags. Filippo further stated that he intended to take his own life afterward, to reunite with Giulia, and even showed shallow cuts on his wrists. But he admitted he didn't follow through. Taking another life had been easier than ending his own. Though the physical evidence overwhelmingly pointed to Filippo, the legal team hired by his family clung to the claim of mental confusion and memory loss. His entire defense strategy revolved around this idea, hoping not to escape responsibility entirely, but to receive a lighter sentence or be transferred to a psychiatric facility instead of prison. That's when Giulia's grieving father took an extraordinary step. He handed over pages from her personal diary to investigators and later made portions of them public, determined to shed light on the truth and bring the public's attention to what his daughter had endured. The entries in Giulia's diary made it painfully clear why she had chosen to end the relationship with Filippo and what had really been going on behind closed doors. Though she had deeply cared for him, Filippo had shown increasingly controlling behavior and was emotionally manipulative. He tracked her movements, monitored her phone and social media accounts, forbade her from seeing friends, and demanded constant compliance with his wishes. One particularly intense conflict arose shortly before the tragedy. It was related to Filippo insisting on attending a birthday gathering for Giulia's sister, Elena, a small family event held in the wake of their mother's recent passing. Giulia's family wasn't in the mood for celebrations. However, Filippo reacted with anger, believing that he was already part of the family and entitled to be present at all such gatherings. That argument became a turning point. It pushed Giulia to reevaluate their relationship. She realized she needed to break things off for good. But Filippo began using emotional blackmail, threatening to harm himself if she left him. Giulia, being empathetic and compassionate, felt guilty. But that kindness would ultimately lead to devastating consequences. The court proceedings began in September 2024. Filippo faced multiple charges: harassment, unlawful detainment, a violent crime with extreme cruelty, fleeing from law enforcement, and tampering with evidence. By the time the trial began, new evidence had surfaced, evidence that made it clear the crime had been premeditated. Investigators found that Filippo had started planning about a week before the incident. He had conducted extensive online research, exploring secluded areas around the suburbs that could be used to carry out the attack and conceal the aftermath. His browser history supported this theory. During a search of his car, officers found a printed map of the region. At first, its significance wasn't obvious, but it later became clear. Filippo had used a physical map instead of GPS to avoid leaving a digital trail. He had planned every detail, except what he would do afterward. It was possible that he had considered self-harm, but the evidence for that was weak and unconvincing. By the time of his trial, it was evident that Filippo had acted with full intent. He eventually stopped using the emotional disorientation defense and made no claims of psychological instability. He admitted that his actions were deliberate. On December 3, 2024, Filippo Turretta was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison and ordered to pay over €500,000 to Giulia's family as compensation for emotional suffering. In his final statement to the court, Filippo said he would not appeal the decision. He acknowledged the verdict as fair and expressed no intent to contest the outcome. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.